She was dying when she reached out for help, but the man who answered wasn't the one she called for, and now neither of them could walk away. When Bella pressed send on a desperate message meant for her husband, she didn't know she'd just reached across Seoul into the world of Wang Ji, a Korean mafia boss who lived by blood, power, and control. Across the glowing cityscape, Wang Ji read her words and felt something crack through years of ice, a primal need to protect what wasn't his. One misdirected plea would bind two fractured souls together, sparking a dangerous bond that would defy betrayal, violence, and the very rules that governed his empire. Welcome to the channel. Happy New Year to you all. As we step into this new year, I want to wish our amazing community a year filled with love, breakthrough, and incredible new beginnings. I'm so glad you've joined us for another powerful story. Whether this is your first time here or you're a long-time listener, I'm thrilled to have you in our community. Before we get started, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss an episode. It's the best way to support the stories you love. Also, I love seeing how far our stories travel. Leave a comment below and let me know which part of the world you're watching from today. Now, let's jump straight into the story. The pain came in waves, sharp, then drowning, then sharp again. Bella's vision blurred at the edges as she slumped against the bathroom wall, her phone clutched in trembling fingers. The tile was cold against her spine, but she was burning from the inside out, her body betraying her in ways she didn't understand and couldn't control. She needed Marcus. God, she needed him right now. Her thumb moved across the screen, muscle memory navigating to his name through the haze of panic. The words came out fractured, desperate, barely coherent. Asterisk baby, I'm dying and I need you. Please come home. I can't breathe. I'm scared. Asterisk. She hit send and let her head fall back, tears streaming hot down her cheeks as she waited for the buzz of his reply, for the sound of his key in the door, for anything that would tell her she wasn't alone in this nightmare. The phone stayed silent. Across the city, in a penthouse that overlooked Seoul like a throne room surveying its kingdom, Wang Ji's phone vibrated against the glass surface of his desk. He'd been reviewing shipping manifests, mundane work that kept his empire's veins flowing with product and profit, but his hand stilled midair when the screen lit up with an unknown number. He didn't get unknown numbers. Everyone who mattered had his contact. Everyone who didn't wouldn't dare. He picked up the phone, his expression unreadable, and read the message once. Then again. Baby, I'm dying and I need you. The words struck something deep in his chest, something he'd long ago buried under layers of violence and control. There was raw terror in those words, a vulnerability so complete it felt obscene to witness. This wasn't a threat or a business proposition. This was a woman falling apart, reaching out in the dark for someone to catch her. And she'd reached him. Wang Ji's jaw tightened as he stared at the screen. He should delete it. Wrong number, wrong person, none of his concern. He had an empire to run, enemies to manage, and no space in his carefully constructed world for the desperate pleas of a stranger. But his thumb was already moving, opening his secure network, running a trace on the number. Within seconds, his phone buzzed with preliminary data. Registered to a Bella Carter, American passport, sole resident for 18 months, married, address in Itaewon. Married. She'd called him baby. She thought he was someone else, someone who should have answered, someone who should have already been on his way. Wang Ji stood, the movement sharp and decisive, his mind already calculating distances and possibilities. He moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city lights that sprawled beneath him like scattered diamonds. Somewhere out there, in one of those 1,000 glowing windows, she was alone and afraid and waiting for help that wasn't coming. He should walk away. This wasn't his problem, wasn't his world. She belonged to someone else. But the primal thing that had stirred in his chest when he read her words wouldn't settle. It clawed and demanded and refused to be ignored. He'd spent years becoming a man who felt nothing, who moved through violence and death with the cold efficiency of a blade. He'd made himself untouchable, unreachable, safe. And one accidental message had cracked that armor wide open. Wang Ji pulled his jacket from the back of his chair, his movements controlled but urgent. He sent a single message to his driver. Asterisk, bring the car. Now. Asterisk. He didn't know why he was doing this. Didn't know what he'd find when he reached her, or what he'd say, or what any of it meant. He only knew that somewhere in Seoul, a woman had called out for help, and her cry had found its way to him. And Wang Ji had never been a man who ignored his instincts. Wang Ji's penthouse had become a war room by dawn. 3 laptops glowed on the dining table, surveillance feeds cycling across multiple screens while his most trusted operatives worked in tense silence. He stood at the windows with his arms crossed, watching Seoul wake up beneath him, but his mind was locked on the address his team had confirmed hours ago. She'd been alone when they'd arrived. No husband rushing through the door, no ambulance lights painting the street red and blue. Just a woman passed out on a bathroom floor, discovered by a neighbor who'd heard the fall. The hospital had taken her before Wang Ji's men could make direct contact, which was probably for the best. He wasn't ready to explain why a mafia boss had sent armed men to check on someone else's wife in the middle of the night. "Boss." Min Jun's voice cut through his thoughts. His second-in-command stood by the table, tablet in hand, his expression carefully neutral in that way that meant the news wasn't good. Full workup on Bella Carter. Wang Ji turned from the window and crossed to the table. The screen showed everything. Immigration records, social media accounts, hospital admissions, financial statements. Her life laid bare in pixels and data. "She's got an autoimmune condition," Min Jun continued, scrolling through medical files that shouldn't have been accessible but were, because Wang Ji's reach extended into every shadow of the city. Flare-ups can be triggered by stress. Last night was bad enough that she'll be hospitalized for at least a week, maybe more. Wang Ji's jaw tightened as he studied the images on screen. There was Bella at a cafe, smiling at her phone. Bella at a hospital entrance, looking small and tired. Bella in her wedding photos, radiant and white beside a man who looked like he'd won something. Marcus Carter. The husband who hadn't answered. What about him? Wang Ji's voice was flat, dangerous. Min Jun swiped to a new file, and Wang Ji felt something cold settle in his gut. Marcus Carter, investment banker, or so he claims. In reality, he's been running money for small-time operations, trying to play in circles too big for him. He's racked up significant debt in the last 6 months. To who? The silence that followed was answer enough. Min Jun glanced at the other operatives before meeting Wang Ji's eyes. Choi Jin-woo. The name landed like a blade between ribs. Choi Jin-woo, his oldest rival, the one man in Seoul whose ambition matched his own, whose cruelty exceeded even the standards of their violent world. They'd maintained an uneasy truce for years, each controlling different territories, different operations. But Choi was always looking for leverage, always searching for weaknesses to exploit. How much? 300 million won. Maybe more. Choi's been patient, letting the interest compound, waiting for Carter to become desperate enough to be useful. Min Jun's expression darkened. There's more. Marcus has been seen with Choi's people. Regular meetings. We think he's being groomed as an informant, possibly for financial operations in the international district. Wang Ji processed this in silence, his mind working through implications and connections. Marcus Carter was a fool who'd gambled with the wrong people and lost. That was his problem. But Bella was collateral damage, a woman trapped in a marriage to a man who was not only neglecting her but actively endangering her by association with Choi. Where is she now? Severance Hospital, room 1407. She's stable but sedated. No visitors except hospital staff. Min Jun paused. Her husband hasn't been to see her yet. Something twisted in Wang Ji's chest, that same primal thing that had stirred when he'd read her message. She'd been dying and calling for help, and the man who'd promised to protect her had been too busy selling his soul to Wang Ji's enemy to even pick up the phone. "I want eyes on Marcus Carter 24 hours, Wang Ji said, his voice cold and absolute. "Every meeting, every transaction, every breath. And I want someone watching her hospital room. Discreetly." "Boss." Min Jun's tone held a question he didn't quite ask. Wang Ji met his second's gaze steadily. "She reached out to me. Even if it was an accident. That makes her my concern now." He didn't say what they both knew, that Choi would eventually learn about Bella, and when he did, she would become a target simply by virtue of being Marcus's wife. She was already in danger. She just didn't know it yet. But Wang Ji did. And he was already calculating how to keep her safe. Pause. Subscribe real quick. And drop your country in the comments. You need to witness what happens next. Bella had been discharged 3 days ago, but she still felt hollowed out, like something essential had been scooped from her chest and hadn't grown back yet. The doctors had given her new medications, stricter instructions, and concerned looks that said more than their clinical words ever could. Marcus had picked her up from the hospital with apologies that felt rehearsed, promises that sounded empty, and then disappeared again into whatever consumed his days. She told herself it was work, that he was under pressure, that marriages went through seasons and this was just a hard winter. But she was tired of lying to herself. The cafe near her apartment had become her refuge, a quiet corner where she could sit with tea and pretend she was okay. She'd claimed a table by the window, her laptop open but ignored, watching people pass on the street below. Normal people with normal problems, not women who'd woken up on bathroom floors or sent desperate messages to wrong numbers that still made her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She hadn't told Marcus about that. Couldn't bear to add it to the list of ways she'd been weak and needy and too much. The cafe door opened, bringing in a gust of cold November air and a man who seemed to carry gravity with him. Bella glanced up out of habit, then felt her breath catch. He was tall, commanding in a way that had nothing to do with volume or aggression and everything to do with presence. His black suit was tailored to perfection, his dark hair styled with casual precision, and even from across the cafe she could see the edge of ink curling up his neck from beneath his collar. But it was his eyes that held her, dark and assessing, sweeping the space with the calculation of someone who always knew the exits. Those eyes found her and stopped. Bella's heart kicked against her ribs as he moved toward her table with deliberate purpose, and she realized with a jolt that felt like falling that he was coming to her. Every instinct screamed that this man was dangerous, that she should look away, gather her things, leave. But she couldn't move. Bella Carter. His voice was deep, accented, precise. She nodded, throat dry. Yes. My name is Wang Ji. May I sit? It wasn't really a question, and they both knew it. He was already pulling out the chair across from her, settling into it with the ease of someone who owned every space he occupied. Up close, she could see the full artwork of his tattoos, the sharp intelligence in his gaze, the controlled power in every movement. How do you know my name? Her voice came out smaller than she intended. You sent me a message. His eyes held hers, steady and unflinching. 4 nights ago. You needed help. The embarrassment that flooded through her was so acute it felt physical. Oh God. I'm so sorry, I meant to text my husband, I must have. She pressed her hands to her face. I'm mortified. I was sick, I wasn't thinking clearly, I didn't mean to bother. Did he come? The question cut through her rambling. Bella lowered her hands slowly, meeting Wang Ji's gaze. There was something in his expression that wasn't judgment or pity but something else, something that made her chest tighten. Eventually. He had a work thing. Wang Ji's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You collapsed. You were hospitalized for 5 days. And he had a work thing. Hearing it said aloud, stated with such flat certainty, made something crack inside her. Tears burned behind her eyes but she blinked them back fiercely. She would not cry in front of this stranger, would not add to the spectacle she'd already made of herself. Why are you here? She whispered. Wang Ji leaned forward, and the movement brought him into her space in a way that should have felt threatening but somehow didn't. Because when someone reaches out to me for help, I answer. Even if they didn't mean to call. I'm fine now. Really. You didn't need to. You're not safe. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through everything she'd been telling herself. Bella stared at him, and Wang Ji held her gaze with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. Your husband has made dangerous choices. Those choices have consequences that will reach you whether you know about them or not. He paused, then added quietly, I can protect you from them. If you'll let me. Bella should have said no. Should have stood up and walked away from this dangerous man with his tattoos and his certainty and his promises that felt too big to be real. But when Wang Ji extended his hand across the table, an offer, an anchor, she found herself reaching back. His grip was firm, warm, steady. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Bella felt safe. Bella had promised Wang Ji she'd think about his offer. That's what she'd told him when they'd parted at the cafe, his business card tucked into her purse like a secret she wasn't ready to acknowledge. She'd gone home to her empty apartment and tried to convince herself that everything was fine, that Marcus loved her, that marriages were built on trust and she owed him that. But trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. She'd noticed the pattern over the past week. Marcus coming home later and later, his explanations growing vaguer, his phone always face down on every surface. The way he'd started sleeping on the edge of the bed, careful not to touch her even accidentally. The way he looked through her instead of at her, like she'd already faded into furniture. So when he said he had a late meeting and would be home past midnight, something in Bella's chest went cold and clear. She waited an hour after he left, then called a taxi to the address she'd found buried in his jacket pocket, a luxury apartment building in Gangnam that neither of them could afford. The doorman barely glanced at her as she entered, following a group of residents through the lobby. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she took the elevator to the 14th floor, her hands shaking as she found Unit 1408. She should have knocked. Should have texted first. Should have done 1,000 things differently. Instead, she used the keycard she'd found with the address. The door opened soundlessly into a space drenched in warm light and expensive minimalism. Bella stepped inside, her breath shallow, and heard the laughter before she saw anything else. A woman's voice, bright and comfortable, followed by Marcus's low response, intimate in a way that made Bella's stomach twist. She moved toward the sound on autopilot, her body disconnected from her mind, until she reached the bedroom doorway and saw them. Marcus sat on the edge of an unfamiliar bed, his shirt unbuttoned, his hair mussed in a way Bella recognized from years of marriage. A woman perched beside him in silk pajamas, young, beautiful, Korean, her hand resting possessively on his thigh as she leaned into his shoulder. They looked comfortable together. They looked like they'd done this 1,000 times. Marcus. The word came out strangled, barely her own voice. Marcus's head snapped up, his face draining of color as their eyes met. The woman beside him had the grace to look startled at least, pulling away with wide eyes. Bella, Jesus, what are you doing here? The question was so absurd, so backwards, that Bella almost laughed. What am I doing here? What are you? She couldn't finish, couldn't find words big enough for the betrayal splitting her open. Marcus stood quickly, hands raised like she was something spooked and dangerous. This isn't what it looks like. Minji is just, we're working together, she's helping me with. Don't. Bella's voice cracked. Don't insult me more than you already have. The woman, Minji, gathered a robe around herself and slipped past Bella without meeting her eyes, disappearing into another room. Bella barely noticed. Her entire world had narrowed to Marcus, to the man she'd married and trusted and called for when she was dying. How long? She whispered. Marcus's jaw worked. Bella, it's complicated. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, the money problems. How long, Marcus? 6 months. He said it quietly, like that would soften the blow. Maybe 7. 7 months. She'd been sick for 8. She'd been collapsing and scared and reaching out for him, and he'd been here. With her. I texted you. Bella's voice was hollow now, emptied of everything but the facts. 4 nights ago. I told you I was dying. I told you I needed you. Marcus had the decency to flinch. I was in a meeting. I couldn't just. You were with her. It wasn't a question. The silence confirmed it. Bella felt something fundamental shift inside her, like tectonic plates rearranging themselves into new configurations. She thought of Wang Ji reading that message in his penthouse across the city. A stranger who'd sent men to check on her, who'd traced her to the hospital, who'd sat across from her in a cafe and offered protection when the man who'd promised it in front of God and family had been too busy betraying her to answer his phone. I want a divorce, she said, and the words felt like the first true thing she'd said in months. Marcus's expression shifted from guilt to panic. "Bella, wait, you can't just, we need to talk about this. There are things you don't know, complications." "The only complication," Bella said, pulling Wang Ji's card from her purse with steady hands, "is that I stayed this long." She turned and walked out of the apartment, leaving Marcus calling after her with excuses that no longer mattered. In the elevator, she stared at the embossed card in her hands. Black on black, expensive and understated, with a single phone number. Her dying plea had been ignored by her husband but answered by a stranger. And now she knew exactly who deserved her trust. Hold up, subscribe first. Then comment your location. Now brace yourself. This story is about to explode. The penthouse was nothing like Bella expected. She'd braced herself for something cold and sterile, a bachelor's lair of glass and steel that matched the dangerous man who owned it. Instead, Wang Ji's space held warmth, dark wood accents, art that looked collected rather than purchased, floor-to-ceiling windows that brought Seoul's lights inside like scattered stars. "The guest room is through here," Wang Ji said, leading her down a hallway lined with subtle lighting. His hand hovered near the small of her back, not quite touching but close enough that she felt the heat of it. "You'll have privacy. My staff knows not to disturb you unless you ask." Bella followed him in silence, still processing the surreal turn her life had taken. 2 days ago she'd confronted Marcus. Yesterday she'd signed preliminary divorce papers while her husband pleaded and made promises neither of them believed. And tonight she'd packed 2 suitcases and accepted Wang Ji's offer of protection, stepping into a world she didn't understand with a man who terrified and steadied her in equal measure. The guest room was larger than her entire apartment had been, decorated in soft grays and creams with a bed that looked like clouds. Her medication bottles were already arranged on the nightstand. Wang Ji must have had someone collect her prescriptions. "Thank you," she whispered, suddenly exhausted by the weight of everything. "I don't know why you're doing this, but thank you." Wang Ji turned to face her fully, and in the dim light she could see the tattoos that disappeared beneath his collar. Intricate artwork that spoke of allegiances and violence she couldn't begin to decode. "You called me," he said simply. "That makes you mine to protect." The possessiveness in his tone should have frightened her. Instead, it sent warmth flooding through her chest. She'd been in the penthouse for 3 days when the nightmare came. Bella woke gasping, her body convinced she was back on that bathroom floor, dying and alone and calling out to someone who would never answer. The panic was chemical, unstoppable, her lungs refusing to pull in enough air no matter how hard she tried. She stumbled out of bed on shaking legs, needing space, needing light, needing something to anchor her to reality. The penthouse was dark except for the city glow through the windows, and she made her way to the living room without thinking, focused only on breathing, on not drowning in her own fear. Wang Ji was there. He sat on the leather sofa in sleep pants and a black t-shirt, papers spread on the coffee table before him, working even at 3 in the morning. His head snapped up when she entered, his body tensing with immediate alertness before he registered it was her. "Bella." He was on his feet in seconds, crossing to her as she pressed a hand to her chest. "What's wrong? Are you in pain?" She shook her head, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. Wang Ji studied her face for a moment, then did something unexpected. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he gathered her against his chest. The embrace was firm, grounding, his hand spreading across her back as his other cradled her head. Bella felt herself shatter against him, months of fear and betrayal and loneliness pouring out in silent tears that soaked into his shirt. He didn't shush her or tell her it was okay. He just held her, steady and immovable, like he could take the weight of everything she carried. "I've got you," he murmured against her hair. "You're safe. I promise you're safe." When the tears finally subsided, Bella pulled back enough to look at him, and found his dark eyes watching her with an intensity that stole what little breath she'd recovered. In the dim light, with his guard lowered by the late hour, she could see something raw in his expression, something that looked dangerously like need. "Stay with me," she whispered, not sure what she was asking but certain she couldn't face the dark alone. Wang Ji's jaw tightened, conflict warring across his features. Then he nodded once and led her to the sofa, settling into the corner and pulling her down beside him. Bella curled against his side without hesitation, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder like it belonged there. They sat in silence, the city breathing beyond the windows, and Wang Ji's hand traced absent patterns on her arm. Soothing, protective, hypnotic. Bella felt herself drifting, the panic ebbing away beneath his touch. "Why me?" she asked drowsily. "You could have ignored that text." "Should have." Wang Ji was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough with something that sounded like confession. "I've spent 10 years building walls, Bella. Making myself into something that couldn't be touched or hurt or weakened. And then you sent me 3 sentences, and every wall I'd built came down." His hand tightened on her arm. "I think my soul was waiting for yours. I just didn't know it until you called." Bella tilted her head up to look at him, and found him already watching her with eyes that held galaxies of want and restraint. The air between them felt charged, inevitable, like standing at the edge of something vast and irrevocable. When he kissed her, it was gentle, a question more than a claim. Bella answered by pressing closer, her hand finding the ink on his neck, tracing the artwork that marked him as dangerous while his lips promised her safety. They stayed there until dawn broke over soul, wrapped in each other, transforming from strangers into something neither had words for yet but both recognized as essential. The first threat came disguised as a gift. Bella had been living in Wang Ji's penthouse for 2 weeks, her health steadily improving under the care of doctors Wang Ji had personally vetted. She'd started to feel something like peace, mornings spent reading by the windows, afternoons when Wang Ji would return early just to have lunch with her, evenings that ended with them tangled together on the sofa, learning each other in stolen moments between his empire's demands. She should have known it was too perfect to last. The package arrived with the afternoon mail, elegant black wrapping with her name written in precise calligraphy. Min Jun had brought it up himself, his expression tight with concern as he handed it to Wang Ji instead of Bella. She watched from the kitchen doorway as Wang Ji's face went carefully blank. The expression she'd learned meant he was containing rage. "What is it?" she asked, moving toward them. "Stay there." Wang Ji's voice was harder than she'd ever heard it. He opened the box with controlled movements, and Bella saw his jaw clench before he slammed the lid back down. But not before she'd glimpsed what was inside. Photographs. Of her. Leaving the hospital, entering the cafe where she'd first met Wang Ji, walking through the lobby of this very building. Dozens of images documenting her movements, her life, proving that someone had been watching her for weeks. Beneath the photos was a single card with a message in Korean. Wang Ji read it, and something dangerous flickered across his features. "What does it say?" Bella's voice came out smaller than she intended. Wang Ji looked at her, and for the first time since they'd met, she saw something like regret in his eyes. "It says, 'Beautiful things break so easily. It would be a shame if something happened to Wang Ji's new treasure.'" The words hit her like ice water. Who sent this? Choi Jin-woo. Wang Ji's hands were steady as he pulled out his phone, already issuing rapid commands in Korean to whoever answered. "Your husband's creditor. My rival." Bella sank onto the arm of the nearest chair, her mind racing through implications. "He knows about me. About us. He knows you're here. He knows you matter to me." Wang Ji crossed to her, cupping her face with hands that were gentle despite the violence she could see building behind his eyes. "That makes you a target, Bella. I'm sorry. I should have anticipated this, should have protected you better. This isn't your fault." "It is." His thumb traced her cheekbone, his expression raw. "Everything I touch turns to warfare. Everyone I care about becomes a weapon someone can use against me. I've spent years making sure I cared about nothing, no one, because caring is weakness in my world." He leaned his forehead against hers. "And then you called me, and I couldn't walk away. Now you're in danger because I was selfish enough to keep you." Bella's heart cracked at the self-recrimination in his voice. She covered his hands with hers, holding his gaze. "I'm not leaving. Bella. I'm not leaving," she repeated firmly. "I was dying and alone with a man who claimed to love me but couldn't be bothered to pick up his phone. You're dangerous, yes. Your world is violent and terrifying, yes. But you answered when I called. You've protected me, cared for me, made me feel like I matter for the first time in years. She pressed her lips to his palm. I'm not running because someone threatened me. I'm staying because being with you, even with the danger, is the safest I've ever felt. Wang Ji closed his eyes, something like pain crossing his features. When he opened them again, the vulnerability was gone, replaced by cold determination. Then I need to end this. Quickly. He pulled away and turned to Minjun, who'd been waiting silently by the door. Triple the security on the penthouse. I want armed guards on every entrance, and put a team on Bella whenever she leaves this building. His voice dropped to something lethal. And send word to Choi Jin-woo. Tell him I'm requesting a meeting. Boss, that's exactly what he wants. I know. Wang Ji's smile was sharp and humorless. He wants to see if I've gone soft, if caring about someone has made me weak. So I'll show him what I've become. He glanced back at Bella, and she saw the transformation complete. The man who'd held her through nightmares replaced by the Mafia boss who'd built an empire on fear. I'm a monster with a conscience now. And that makes me more dangerous than I've ever been. Minjun bowed slightly and left to carry out the orders. Wang Ji returned to Bella, pulling her fully into his arms, and she felt him memorize her. The way she fit against him, the rhythm of her breathing, the trust she offered so freely despite knowing what he was. I won't let him touch you, he murmured into her hair. Whatever it costs. Whatever I have to do. You're mine to protect and I keep what's mine. Bella held him tighter, understanding that the price of loving Wang Ji might be steep. But as she stood in his arms while he planned warfare to keep her safe, she realized she'd pay it gladly. Some things were worth fighting for. He was one of them. The Hanok had been Wang Ji's secret for years, a traditional Korean house hidden in the mountains outside Seoul, surrounded by pine forests and far from the violence that defined his empire. He'd brought Bella here 3 days ago, needing her away from the city while he prepared for his confrontation with Choi. The meeting was scheduled for tomorrow, terms negotiated through intermediaries, rules of engagement agreed upon. Wang Ji should have known Choi wouldn't honor any of it. Bella woke to silence, the kind that felt wrong too complete, like the world was holding its breath. She reached across the bed and found Wang Ji's side empty, the sheets cool. Moonlight filtered through the traditional paper screens, casting geometric shadows across the wooden floors. She pulled on a robe and padded quietly through the Hanok, following the faint glow of light from the main room. Wang Ji stood by the windows overlooking the courtyard, fully dressed despite the late hour, his phone pressed to his ear as he spoke in rapid Korean. Even from behind, she could read the tension in his shoulders. He ended the call as she approached, turning to face her with an expression that made her stomach drop. Get dressed. No. We're leaving. What's wrong? Choi's men are coming. My perimeter guards just reported movement in the forest, at least a dozen armed mercenaries closing in on our position. Wang Ji was already moving, pulling her toward the bedroom. I have a car waiting at the north entrance, but we need to move fast. Bella's heart hammered as she threw on clothes with shaking hands. This was her fault. Choi was coming for her because she mattered to Wang Ji, because she'd become the weakness the monster had been looking for. Wang Ji returned with a gun in one hand and her medication bag in the other, prepared even in crisis to ensure she had what she needed. The gesture was so perfectly him that Bella felt tears burn behind her eyes. Stay behind me, he said, his voice dropping into something cold and commanding. Do exactly what I say when I say it. Understand? She nodded, and they moved through the Hanok together, Wang Ji checking corners with practiced efficiency. They'd almost reached the rear entrance when the first window exploded inward, glass cascading across the floor as a canister bounced into the room, spewing thick smoke. Wang Ji cursed and pulled Bella against him, shielding her body with his as gunfire erupted outside. The careful discipline of his perimeter guards returning fire, the chaotic spray of automatic weapons from Choi's mercenaries, it was impossible to tell who was winning. Change of plans. Wang Ji dragged her toward the center of the Hanok, to a section of floor she'd assumed was decorative. He pulled up a hidden panel, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. There's a tunnel that leads to the forest. Follow it until you reach a stone marker, then go east. My men will find you. What about you? I'm buying you time. He pressed the gun into her hands, closing her fingers around the grip. Bella, listen to me. I need you to run, and I need you to not look back. Can you do that? No. The word came out fierce, desperate. I'm not leaving you. You have to. Wang Ji cupped her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone even as chaos exploded around them. I can't fight and protect you at the same time. I need to know you're safe. Please, Bella. For me. More windows shattered. Smoke filled the room, burning her lungs. Bella heard shouting in Korean, the heavy footsteps of men entering the hanok from multiple directions. Wang Ji kissed her hard and fast, pouring everything unsaid into that single moment of connection. Then he physically turned her toward the tunnel. Run. Now. Bella descended 3 steps, then looked back. Wang Ji had already moved to face the entrance, his stance wide and ready, a man preparing to become the monster his reputation promised. In the smoke and shadows, with the ink on his neck visible and violence in his eyes, he looked terrifying. But when he glanced back at her one final time, his expression softened. I'll find you. I promise. Then the first mercenary burst through the door, and Wang Ji moved. Bella ran. The tunnel was narrow and dark, the sound of gunfire echoing behind her as she stumbled forward with shaking hands outstretched. Tears streamed down her face, her breath coming in ragged gasps, but she kept moving because he'd asked her to, because staying meant becoming the leverage Choi needed to destroy him. She emerged in the forest minutes or hours later. Time had lost meaning in the dark, and collapsed against a tree, her lungs burning as she clutched the gun he'd given her. The stone marker was 50 feet away, exactly where he'd said it would be. Behind her, the hanok burned. She could see the orange glow through the trees, hear the diminishing gunfire as the fight reached its conclusion. And Bella waited in the dark, praying to God she didn't believe in that Wang Ji would keep his promise and find her. Because she'd already lost too much. She couldn't lose him too. Before I show you the craziest part, hit that subscribe button and tell me where you're watching from. This is about to get wild. Wang Ji found her at dawn, emerging from the forest with blood on his shirt and death in his eyes. Bella scrambled to her feet, the gun falling forgotten as she ran to him, her hands frantically searching for wounds as he caught her against his chest. I'm fine, he murmured, though his voice was rough with exhaustion. Most of this isn't mine. She pulled back to look at him properly. His face was streaked with ash and sweat, his knuckles split and raw, but his eyes were clear and focused entirely on her. Behind him, Min-jun and 4 other men emerged from the tree line, all bearing the marks of combat. Choi, Bella whispered. Escaped. His mercenaries weren't as lucky. Wang Ji's expression went cold and flat. But this ends today. I'm done playing defense. They returned to Seoul in a convoy of armored vehicles, and Bella watched Wang Ji transform during the drive. He made call after call in clipped Korean, his voice carrying absolute authority as he mobilized resources she hadn't known existed. By the time they reached the penthouse, his entire empire was moving like a machine built for a single purpose: war. The penthouse had become a command center. Men in expensive suits filled the living room, underbosses and lieutenants, financial controllers and enforcers, all waiting for Wang Ji's orders. He stood before them with Bella at his side, making it clear to everyone present that she was under his protection, that any threat to her was a declaration of war against him personally. Choi Jin-woo has violated every code we operate under, Wang Ji said, his voice carrying through the room. He attacked a place of sanctuary. He targeted an innocent woman to get to me. He's shown that he respects no boundaries, honors no traditions. He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. So neither will I. Min-jun stepped forward with a tablet, displaying financial records, shipping manifests, photographs. We've identified every business Choi operates, every account he controls, every person he's compromised. We have everything we need to dismantle his empire in 48 hours. Wang Ji's smile was sharp and merciless. We're going to give him a choice. Disappear completely. Leave Seoul, leave Korea, leave Asia, and live out his days in exile. Or stay and watch me destroy everything he's built, everyone he loves, until there's nothing left but the memory of his name as a warning to others. One of the underbosses spoke up, his tone respectful but questioning. And Marcus Carter? Bella stiffened at her husband's name. Wang Ji's hand found the small of her back, steadying her. Carter's debts are forgiven, Wang Ji said, and the room murmured in surprise. I'm buying them from Choi as part of the settlement. And then Carter is going to sign divorce papers, relinquish all claims to his wife, and also disappear. If he's smart, he'll go somewhere I'll never have to see his face again. And if he's not smart? Minjun asked. Wang Ji's expression promised violence. Then he'll learn that there are fates worse than Choi's mercenaries. The meeting lasted 3 hours, every detail of the operation planned with surgical precision. Bella sat beside Wang Ji throughout, watching him orchestrate the systematic dismantling of his rival's power. She should have been horrified by the casual discussion of violence and intimidation, the way these men calculated destruction like accountants balancing books. Instead, she felt safe. The confrontation happened at neutral ground, a warehouse by the Han River, chosen for its isolation and lack of witnesses. Wang Ji brought 20 men. Choi brought 15 and Marcus, who looked like he'd aged a decade in the weeks since Bella had left him. Bella watched from Wang Ji's armored car as the two bosses faced each other in the cavernous space, Minjun standing at Wang Ji's right shoulder while Choi's second mirrored the position. Marcus stood apart, realizing too late that he was a pawn in a game he'd never understood. Wang Ji spoke first, his voice carrying in the empty warehouse. You made a mistake, Choi. You thought loving someone made me weak. You thought you could use her to control me. And I was wrong. Choi's smile was mocking, but Bella could see the tension in his stance. You were wrong about what kind of monster it would make me. Wang Ji stepped forward, and even through the car window Bella could feel the menace radiating from him. I'm offering you terms once. Exile or annihilation. You have 60 seconds to choose. Choi's face went red with rage. You think you can threaten me? I've built. 45 seconds. Minjun pulled out a tablet, displaying real-time feeds of Choi's businesses. Warehouses burning, accounts being drained, associates being arrested by police who'd suddenly found cause for raids. Wang Ji had already begun the destruction. 30 seconds. Choi stared at the screens, watching his empire crumble in real time, and Bella saw the exact moment he understood he'd lost. His shoulders sagged, his expression shifting from rage to resignation. I'll go, he said quietly. But this isn't over, Wang. Someday. There is no someday. Wang Ji's voice was final. You're a ghost now. And ghosts who return get exorcised permanently. Choi left with his men, defeated and diminished. Wang Ji turned to Marcus, who flinched under his gaze. Sign the papers. Tonight. Then disappear. Wang Ji's voice held no mercy. If you ever contact Bella again, if I ever hear you speak her name, what I did to Choi will look like kindness compared to what I'll do to you. Marcus nodded frantically and fled. Wang Ji returned to the car, sliding in beside Bella and pulling her immediately into his arms. She felt him exhale, the tension draining from his body as he buried his face in her hair. It's over, he murmured. You're safe. We're safe. Bella held him tight, understanding that he'd just reshaped his entire world to protect her. That he'd become something more dangerous than he'd ever been, all for the woman who'd accidentally sent him a desperate message in the dark. Take me home, she whispered. And Wang Ji did. If you're seeing this, subscribe now and drop your location. Destiny brought you here, the next scene proves it. 6 months after the warehouse confrontation, Bella stood in front of the mirror in Wang Ji's penthouse, their penthouse now, and barely recognized herself. Her health had stabilized under the care of Seoul's best specialists, doctors who answered to Wang Ji and treated her like she was precious. The hollowness that had lived in her chest for so long had been replaced by something warm and alive and impossibly hopeful. Her divorce from Marcus had been finalized within 2 weeks, the papers signed in the presence of lawyers who'd made it clear this was a courtesy, not a negotiation. Marcus had vanished to somewhere in Europe, his debts paid but his reputation destroyed. Bella found she couldn't even summon anger for him anymore. He was a ghost from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Wang Ji appeared in the doorway, devastating in a traditional black hanbok embroidered with subtle silver thread. His tattoos were partially visible above the collar, the artwork she'd traced with her fingers 1,000 times now. He'd had the hanok rebuilt after the attack, restored it to something even more beautiful than before, and today it would serve as the setting for their wedding. "You're staring," Bella said, turning to face him with a smile that felt easier than breathing. "I'm memorizing." Wang Ji crossed to her, his hands finding her waist with the familiarity of someone who'd earned the right to touch her freely. "I want to remember exactly how you look right now, before you become my wife." She wore a cream-colored hanbok, simpler than traditional bridal wear but perfect in its elegance. Her natural hair was styled in soft braids woven with delicate silver pins that matched Wang Ji's embroidery. She looked like herself, finally. Not the woman who'd been dying and desperate, but someone who'd been found and chosen and kept. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. Bella thought about the journey that had brought them here, a misdirected text, a stranger's protection, betrayals and bullets and burning buildings. She thought about how Wang Ji had dismantled his carefully constructed walls for her, how he'd become a monster with a conscience, how he'd chosen her safety over everything his world valued. "I've been ready since the moment you answered," she said. The ceremony was small, intimate. Just Min Jun and a handful of Wang Ji's most trusted men, along with 2 friends Bella had made in Seoul who asked no questions about her husband's business. They spoke their vows in the rebuilt hanok's courtyard, surrounded by pine trees and the quiet of the mountains, and when Wang Ji kissed her as his wife, Bella tasted salt and realized she was crying. "Happy tears," she assured him, and his smile transformed his face into something almost boyish. The months that followed were a study in domestic bliss punctuated by the realities of Wang Ji's empire. He still left for meetings Bella didn't ask about, still made decisions that shaped Seoul's underworld, but he always came home to her. Always held her through the night. Always made sure she felt protected and cherished and essential. When Bella discovered she was pregnant, Wang Ji stared at the test in his hands for a full minute before dropping to his knees in front of her, pressing his forehead to her stomach with something like reverence. "A family," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "You're giving me a family." Their daughter was born on a spring morning, tiny and perfect with a shock of dark hair and lungs that announced her presence with authority. Wang Ji held her with hands that had dealt death and violence, cradling her like she was made of light and promise, and Bella watched the most dangerous man in Seoul become utterly undone by 7 pounds of new life. "Jaiwan," he murmured, testing the name they'd chosen together. "Our miracle." Bella reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together as their daughter slept between them. She thought about the woman she'd been, collapsed on a bathroom floor, sending a desperate message into the void, certain she was dying alone. She'd been wrong about the dying part. That woman had died, yes, but only so this version could be born. The one who'd been found by a stranger in the dark, who'd been protected and chosen and loved with an intensity that had reshaped both their worlds. "What are you thinking?" Wang Ji asked, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. Bella looked at him, at the tattoos and the tenderness, the violence and the devotion, the monster who'd learned to be human for her. She looked at their daughter, the physical manifestation of a love that had started with 3 sentences sent to the wrong number. "I'm thinking I sent that text to exactly the right person," she said. Wang Ji leaned across their sleeping daughter to kiss her, soft and lingering, and Bella felt the truth of it settle into her bones. She'd been looking for safety in all the wrong places for so long. But safety wasn't Marcus or marriage or trying to be less of a burden. Safety was this, a man who'd answered when she called, who'd fought for her when she couldn't fight for herself, who'd chosen her over everything his world had taught him to value. "I love you," Wang Ji whispered against her lips. "My Bella. My wife. My home." And Bella, who'd once thought she was dying alone in the dark, discovered that she'd actually been finding her way toward the light all along. It had just taken the wrong number to lead her there. Thank you so much for watching to the end. Which part of Bella and Wang Ji's story was your favorite? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and res hair to help us bring you more stories.